April 12th, 2020, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well. There's been a lot going on this past week. So we're going to cover some of the things that took place this past week, give you an update on what's going on with coronavirus. This has, been a devastating week on a number of different levels. So if you've been watching my Facebook Live broadcast, I've been doing some updates on what's taking place. We see that the U.S. is number one when it comes to cases worldwide, over 500,000 cases and about 21,000 deaths. So it's a lot taking place. So I'm going to do an update on some of that. We'll also deal with the African American business owners that are trying to apply for the loans that are part of this $2.2 trillion stimulus bill. Okay, you've heard me talk about that. New York Times has a big article dealing with the problems that a lot of African American owned businesses are having in trying to take advantage of these loans. And then we see that Earl Graves, who was the founder of Black Enterprise magazine, we saw Earl Graves passed away this past week at the age of 85 due to complications from Alzheimer's. Okay, so we'll talk some about Earl Graves in our second hour and the legacy of Earl Graves. I've been reading Black Enterprise magazine over 20 years. I started reading it in college. I used to watch the Black Enterprise TV show, so that was a big loss with the passing of Earl Graves. Another big loss, a lot of people are feeling it here in the city of Detroit, is one of my friends and one of my teachers, Ahati Kalindi E., who was a Grand Master of African Martial Arts. You've heard me interview him a number of times throughout the years. I would attend the World African Martial Arts Conference here in Detroit that he and the Timerian Institute organized. His institute and his family, the E family, Mama Yana and Mama Jendai before Mama Jendai passed away, and Isoke and Abana and Kinke, Remetsu, the whole E family. So, we found out Friday, I think it was Friday morning, I found out that he made his transition due to coronavirus. I knew he was in the hospital. I found out early this month he was in the hospital, and I talked to one of his daughters, Isoke, early this month, and he thought he was doing better, but he didn't make it. So that was a huge loss right there. So, our condolences to the entire E family, his brother Jahi, and a lot of us would see each other now the World African Martial Arts Conference happens every other year, so we used to see each other annually, then see each other every other year. So that was a huge loss. And then also we found out that Brother Clarence Harris, who was affectionately known as Pee-wee, he passed away in the last day or so. I'm not sure the cause of death. I know he was about 90 years old, but this brother was if I remember correctly and understand correctly what Brother Kwesi, Brother Abdul posted on Facebook, he was the one. Well, first of all, he was the founder of Soul Day, the annual Soul Day celebration that took place here in Detroit. But he was basically the one who introduced Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen to Detroit. I know he brought Dr. Ben. He was one of the first ones to bring Dr. Ben here to Detroit, if not the first one. So I knew Brother Clarence Harris as well. And, that's that brother's about 90 years old. He bossed everybody around. I remember when they would organize the Million Man March Alumni Association would organize the Black Bus Tour. And Brother Clarence Harris is on the Black Bus Tour. He's about 90, 91, 92, something like that, maybe 93 years old, man. He's bossing everybody around. So, our condolences to the family, okay? So, let me say this from the start, right? I got a ton of information. I don't want this to be a doom and gloom show. I got a ton of information that's dealing with Trump and all this stuff. So I could do 2 hours of that, but I have some other topics to lighten things up, because I got like 40 articles here. I got a ton of information. I'm not going to deal with all this tonight. You can watch some of my broadcasts throughout the week. We'll deal with some of this, but also I want to deal with two really good topics. One, Tyler Perry purchased groceries for a number of seniors at I think it was about 70 different grocery stores this past week to help out seniors. That's a really, really good story. You have a lot of good stories of celebrities really pitching in, really helping out during this traumatic time, okay? So I want to talk about that, and then also Huffington Post had an article dealing with that. Then also Master P, in his hometown of New Orleans, Master P is offering free home cleanings for senior citizens in New Orleans during this COVID-19 pandemic. So that's really, really good, something good that Master P is doing. Also something really good and uplifting Tyler Perry is doing. So we'll talk about that on tonight's show as well. So let me, because I had to alter some of the topics on my show tonight because it's just too depressing. We saw this past week, so I got to deal with some of this news. And I've said before, this is Trump's fault, and more evidence came out this month to prove that I was correct in saying this. Okay, this stuff was largely avoidable with coronavirus. There were warnings going back as early as November that he ignored, from the warnings from the intelligence community that he ignored. And once again, this is an example of how elections have consequences and what happens when you have incompetent leadership. So we saw this past week that another 6.6 million Americans filed for unemployment. And now we've had almost 17 million people file for unemployment in the past 4 weeks. This past week we saw here in the state of Michigan that approximately 35,000 people filed for unemployment. Also, Governor Gretchen Whitmer extended her stay-at-home order, extended to April 30th, basically May 1st. She's getting a lot of backlash from some of the added restrictions to the stay-at-home order, and she should. Because some of this doesn't make sense. We'll talk about some of the added restrictions. I understand she's trying to save lives, things like this, but some of this is going too far. Republicans in the state legislature threatening protests against her, threatening to have 2 rallies to protest against her. We know Representative Justin Amash, who was the only Republican in the House of Representatives to advocate for Trump being impeached. And he got so much backlash from the traitors that he left the Republican Party and became an independent. He said that she's going too far with these added measures. So we'll talk a little bit about that. There was first of all, follow me on my Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Follow me on my personal page, Michael Imhotep, also on Facebook, IMHOTEP. And then follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, as well. There was a article that came out. There was a study that came out. I think it was earlier this week, and I talked about it in one of my broadcasts. The broadcast I did this past Thursday. I did a broadcast Thursday dealing with the unemployment numbers. Okay, that was Thursday, April 9th, if I remember correctly, dealing with the unemployment numbers. You had news.yahoo.com had a really good article. Smoking marijuana could make the lungs more susceptible to COVID-19, experts say, as cannabis sales spike. Smoking marijuana could make the lungs more susceptible to COVID-19, experts say, as cannabis sales spike. And I posted this article a couple of times on my Facebook fan page, the African History Network, and my personal page. And a lot of people were laughing, thought it was a joke. It's not a joke, it's serious. And if we go and we look at more information coming out this past week, dealing with how, like NBCnews.com has an article, African Americans may be dying from COVID-19 at a higher rate. Advocates are demanding data. We see that there was another one from NBCnews.com that deals with African Americans disproportionately affected by coronavirus. CDC report finds Center for Disease Control, obesity, high blood pressure, and type 2 diabetes, all more prevalent in African American communities, are risk factors for coronavirus outcomes. Well, we see that marijuana usage has been promoted for years in hip-hop music, especially corporate-controlled hip-hop music, marketed to the African American community. Now, I understand the medicinal purposes for cannabis, for marijuana, for hemp. That's true. But you get a higher concentration of THC when you consume it, like when you put it in food, as opposed to when you smoke it. But this is something when we look at African Americans making up 70% of the deaths of COVID-19 in Chicago, 40% of the deaths in Michigan. And when we look at various big cities or various cities in general or states where we are outpacing our percentages, our population percentage, and we look at the role that underlying conditions play in many African Americans being more susceptible to dying from COVID-19 or having to be hospitalized and being put on the ventilator. And when with COVID-19, if you've been watching the press conferences from Governor Andrew Cuomo of the state of New York, and I watch his press conferences every day. They're much better than these campaign rallies that Donald Trump has, full of lies and truths and trying to promote experimental drugs. When you go on a ventilator because of complications of COVID-19, you're on a ventilator much longer. You somewhere maybe on the average, maybe about 20, 21 days, something like that. And for a lot of people who have to go on a ventilator, it's a good chance they don't. It's a good chance they won't make it. So when we look at underlying health conditions, asthma, bronchitis, obesity, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, lupus in the African American community, and that's compounded with the usage of marijuana, especially recreational marijuana. And we look at the impact that has on your lungs, and coronavirus, COVID-19, which is SARS-CoV-2, is a respiratory virus. Then I mean that's a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for disaster. So I found it interesting that, you know, when I posted this article, people were laughing, thought it was a joke. Maybe they were high when they saw the article. It's not a joke. This is serious. It's not a joke. So we'll talk about some of that on tonight's show and some other topics. Now, on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the show. We deal with current events and history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word KEMET, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828. To sign up for our email newsletter, text the word KEMET, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828. To sign up for our email newsletter. Also, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And you can sign up for the email newsletter there as well. If you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network paypal.me/TheAHNShow, paypal.me/TheAHNShow, or through Cash App, $TheAHNShow through Cash App, $TheAHNShow through Cash App, to donate to the African History Network, and also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button right there on the home page. Okay, so let's see here. What is this? Coming up here on the break. Call-in numbers, area code 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. You listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, April 12th, 2020, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well. We see the stay-in order has been extended in the state of Michigan by Governor Gretchen Whitmer. We'll talk about that and some other topics also. I want to give you an update on what's going on across the country, dealing with the fight of coronavirus. And the call-in number is area code 313-778-600, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. We'll be broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Also, because 910 AM Superstation's Facebook Live is down, so we're getting that up and running right now. All right. I want to look at the updates from the Washington Post. Washington Post and NBC News have really, really good updates dealing with coronavirus and what's been going on. Okay, so I want to look at some of those updates here. So we see that also today's Easter Sunday as well, Resurrection Sunday. We see a lot of people watching church services online. Easter ceremonies on Sunday looked as they never have before, with coronavirus restrictions discouraging or banning large-scale gatherings, including at churches. Some pastors went forward with in-person services. Debate about how and when to reopen the United States continued as the creator of an influential model predicted a resurgence in cases if rules ease on May 1st, while the nation's top expert on infectious disease says some restrictions could begin to be lifted next month. That's Dr. Anthony Fauci. What people have to understand about viruses, and when you study the 1918 Great Pandemic, or the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 and 1919, viruses hit in waves. Is not just one time, one and done. Viruses hit in waves. That second wave that hit in 1918, hit in fall 1918, that was worse than the first wave that hit in about March of 1918. Okay, so viruses happen in waves, and what happened in 1918 is that the virus mutated also. That's the other thing. Okay, so viruses hit in waves, and they tend to mutate as different waves come. Then there was a third wave that happened in early 1919, January, February, early 1919. There was a third wave that hit also. So we really have to understand history, because we've dealt with things like this. It's been over 100 years ago. It's been like 102 years ago. So most people alive today have not lived through something like this. But when we go back and look at that, and that was horrific. 50 million is estimated, 50 million to 100 million people worldwide died of the Spanish flu, dealing with the flu pandemic in 1918. 675,000 people here in the U.S. died. Okay, so we have to, and when we study that, and I've done a broadcast dealing with this, you can watch that at my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. They practice social distancing. They wore surgical masks. They canceled school. They closed down businesses, canceled churches, canceled special events. And we saw different cities reacted differently. There was a big parade in 1918 that took place in Philadelphia. Even though doctors and officials were saying things like this, they were saying don't have a parade. They had it anyway, and that helped to spread the flu faster. It wasn't the reason why the flu spread in Philadelphia, but it helped spread it. Whereas in, I think it was San Francisco, they canceled a parade that was going to take place. So when you look at the response from different cities, you see why certain cities were hit harder than other cities were hit. Okay, but all this deals with understanding history, and this is one of the reasons why we study history, to learn from the successes, to learn from the failures, so we don't repeat the same mistakes. Those that don't know history are destined to repeat it. So 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. JT, let me know if we have any callers. All right. Okay. Let's see here. So let's go back to the updates from the Washington Post. Okay, we'll go back to that. Hold on just a second. I'm trying to get this. The computer's running slowly. All right. And then I want to get to this big story from New York Times. New York Times had a big article from April 10th, updated April 11th. Black-owned businesses could face hurdles in federal aid program. Black-owned businesses could face hurdles in federal aid program. Minority business owners have always struggled to secure bank loans. Now many banks want to deal only with existing customers when making loans through the government's $349 billion aid package. And a lot of African American businesses are not going to be able to take advantage of the $349 billion in this bill. You're going to have some that will. The ones that can definitely should take advantage of this, because this is a reallocation of taxpayer dollars. There's going to be a second bill. Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are already talking about it. Mitch McConnell tried to force one through, a horrible one, through this past week in the Senate. That was blocked. Democrats and members of the Congressional Black Caucus are trying to make this second one even better for small businesses, especially African American owned businesses. Okay, so pay attention to that. While my computer updates, I want to go to this story here from, let's go to this one here from New York Times, so dealing with African American owned businesses. So they talk about, this is an excellent article written by Emily Flitter, F-L-I-T-T-E-R. It's an extensive article, it's about 7 pages, okay? And all this stuff, I print up, I study this. This is what I do. I'm not just a historian. I deal with current events as well. They talk about an African American female entrepreneur named Yasmin Young, Y-O-U-N-G, Yasmin Young, who, and 4 years ago, Yasmin Young walked down the street from Diaspora Salon, the name of her salon, Diaspora Salon, which is the business she owns in Baltimore. And she went to the Bank of America branch where she has a business checking account. And she was thinking of getting a credit card, but from Bank of America. But when a banker there described the requirements that she would have to meet to qualify for a credit card, Yasmin Young says that she left feeling too discouraged to apply. She eventually got a card from Capital One, okay? and never thinking that the decision would one day bring her to the brink of disaster. So after she was forced to temporarily close Diaspora Salon because of the coronavirus pandemic, Yasmin Young tried to get an emergency loan under the federal government's $349 billion relief program for small businesses. And a lot of those loans are the paycheck protection loans, that small businesses can get, businesses that have under 500 employees can get to cover payroll, to cover expenses, to cover the cost of leases, etc. And once again, this is an example of how government is impacting and regulating business. We've seen that you have 43 states that have stay-in orders, including the state of Michigan, the state of Maryland, where Yasmin Young is. Maryland, the governor there is Larry Hogan, who's a Republican. Here in the state of Michigan, where I am, it's Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who is a Democrat. And we see across the country that various governors have stay-in orders, and they're shutting down non-essential businesses. Hair salons, tanning salons, nail salons, barbershops, gyms, okay, the gyms and the things like this, the fitness clubs. A lot of African American owned businesses and other businesses are shut down by government. And once again, all of this, the overwhelming majority of this, was largely avoidable if you had competent leadership in the White House who paid attention to their presidential daily briefings, who paid attention to the information coming from the intelligence community, who paid attention to the scientists. There were warnings going back to at least to November. New information just came out this past week. If we look at the article from, we can look as recently as April 12th. Associated Press had a big article, Signs Missed and Steps Slowed in Trump's Pandemic Response. Signs Missed and Steps Slowed in Trump's Pandemic Response. This is written by Jonathan Lemire, Zeke Myler, Jill Colvin, and Ricardo Alonso Zaldivar. I saw Jonathan Lemire interviewed by Chris Jansen on MSNBC, okay, today. And I went and pulled this article up, came out April 12, 2020, from the Associated Press. We go back to April 8th. If you saw the broadcast I did April 9th, dealing with 6.6 million people filing for unemployment, if you saw that broadcast, I talked about the article that came out the day before from abcnews.com, abcnews.go.com, April 8th, 2020, intelligence report warned of coronavirus crisis as early as November. Intelligence report warned of coronavirus crisis as early as November. As far back as late November, U.S. intelligence officials were warning that a contagion was sweeping through China's Wuhan region, changing the patterns of life and business and posing a threat to the population, according to 4 sources briefed on the secret reporting. Concerns about what is now known to be the novel coronavirus pandemic were detailed in a November 2019 intelligence report by the military's National Center for Medical Intelligence, the NCMI, according to 2 officials familiar with the document's contents. The report was the result of analysis. The report was the result of analysis of wire and computer intercepts coupled with satellite images. It raised alarms because an out-of-control disease would pose a serious threat to U.S. forces in Asia, forces that depend on the National Center for Medical Intelligence, forces that depend on the NCMI's work. And it paints a picture of an American government that could have ramped up mitigation and containment efforts far earlier to prepare for a crisis poised to come home. But when you have a president who has declared war on the scientists for 3 years, when you have a president who's at war with the community, you ignore things like this. You ignore the warning signs. And see, incompetent leadership costs people their lives. Incompetency, elections have consequences. Incompetent leadership costs people their lives. The overwhelming majority of what's taking place right now was largely avoidable if you had somebody who was competent, who paid attention to this and acted accordingly. Then we saw Washington Post had a huge article. I printed this thing up. This was about 24 pages. New York Times, April 11th, 2020. They had a huge article. He could have seen what was coming behind Trump's failure on the virus. This is a huge. This one was 16 pages. The Washington Post had one that was about 24 pages that I printed up. This is from this past week, April 11th, 2020. Saturday, April 11th. He could have seen what was coming behind Trump's failure on the virus. An examination reveals the president, Donald Trump, I use that term president loosely, was warned about the potential for a pandemic, but that internal divisions, lack of planning, and his faith in his own instincts led to a halting response. This is a huge, everybody should read this article. This is a huge article from the New York Times from April 11th, 2020. Any way you cut it, this is going to be bad. A senior medical advisor at the Department of Veterans Affairs, Dr. Carter Mecher, M-E-C-H-E-R, wrote the night of January 28th, 2020, in an email to a group of public health experts scattered around the government and universities. The projected size of the outbreak already seems hard to believe, he said. The projected size of the outbreak already seems hard to believe, he said. Now, at that point, Donald Trump is talking about there was only one case and downplaying it. A month later, February 28th, when he was at a rally in South Carolina, Donald Trump said that this was the Democrats' new hoax. And you remember for a month he said there's only 15 cases. Pretty soon it's going to be down to almost zero. Oh, there may be a zero in the number, but the number's not zero. It's over 500,000 cases right now in the U.S. It's over 500,000 cases. And it's even more. These are documented cases. It's even more than that because you have people who have it but can't get the test. A week after the coronavirus case has been identified, a week after the first coronavirus case had been identified in the United States, and 6 long weeks before Donald Trump finally took aggressive action to confront the danger the nation was facing, a pandemic that is now forecast to take tens of thousands of American lives, Dr. Carter Mecher was urging the upper ranks of the nation's public health bureaucracy to wake up and prepare for the possibility of far more drastic action. Now, the article goes on to say, quote, Dr. Mecher wrote to the group, which called itself Red Dawn. He wrote, quote, "You guys made fun of me screaming to close the schools," end quote. Now I'm screaming, close the colleges and universities. Now, Red Dawn is an inside joke based on the 1984 movie about a band of Americans trying to save the country after a foreign invasion. So his voice was hardly a lone voice. His voice was hardly the only voice. Throughout the month of January 2020, as Donald Trump repeatedly played down the seriousness of the virus and focused on other issues, an array of figures inside his government, from top White House advisors to experts deep in the cabinet departments and intelligence agencies, identified the threat, sounded alarms, and made clear the need for aggressive action. You remember when Donald Trump said, when he was running in the 2016 campaign, he said, you're going to have so many wins that you're going to get tired of winning? You remember that? Are you tired of winning yet? 17 million people filed for unemployment in the past 4 weeks. You tired of winning yet? He wants America to be number one. America's number one in the number of documented cases of coronavirus. You tired of winning yet? Elections have consequences. When he asked African Americans, what the hell do you have to lose? The correct answer would be everything. The correct answer would be everything. There's less African Americans today that have health insurance. than when President Barack Obama left office. The quality of air has deteriorated over the past 3 years because the Trump administration has reversed or weakened 95 environmental regulations. You have a lot of African American owned businesses that are not going to survive. Not going to survive the detrimental impact coronavirus is having on the economy. The correct answer would be the correct answer would be, what do you have to lose? Everything. We go back to the article from the New York Times, and we'll get back to this other one from the New York Times and with black-owned businesses. All this is tied together. All this is tied together. This is why when I heard people in 2016 talking about we're not going to vote for president, we're just going to build businesses, do economic empowerment, invest in the stock market. I'm like, do you understand that politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement? And politics regulates your business? You got black-owned businesses right now shut down, and if they open up, they're going to be fine. That's government dictating what you do with your business. And then the businesses that stay open, they can only have 5 people in the lobby. They're regulated. African American owned restaurants in general in the state of Michigan and other states, Illinois, Ohio, they can't. There's no dine-in service. It's only takeout service. No dine-in service is only takeout service, which is restricting the revenue for businesses, especially African American owned businesses. Earlier this week here in the state of Michigan, I heard a statistic that 1/3 of restaurants in the state of Michigan are not going to survive this economy because of the coronavirus. 1/3 of restaurants in the state of Michigan are not going to survive. If 1/3 of restaurants in the state of Michigan are not going to survive, and those are mainly white restaurants, what do you think is going to happen to African American owned restaurants? So when we deal with principles of political self-defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans, then you understand, and this is something that I teach on, political self-defense. There's a term that I've coined. It's a whole concept. And one of the things in political self-defense is identifying people and candidates and elected officials who have an anti-black agenda. Everybody wants to talk about a black agenda. First of all, a black agenda is not what candidates and elected officials present to us. That's what we present to them. A black agenda is not what we wait on them to present to us. That's what we present to them. And a black agenda gives you standards for you to evaluate various candidates and by. So, but the first thing you have to do is identify those that have an anti-black agenda. Because an anti-black agenda is worse than not having a black agenda. When you deal with the policies coming from the Trump administration, this is an anti-black agenda. If we look at, and I'm going to come back to this article, see, once again, I told you, look, this is what I do. I do research. I got a ton of articles here. I'm not going to be able to get through all this. But one very, very important article here, thegrio.com had one. I posted this on my Facebook fan page. The U.S. Postal Service is on the verge of collapsing if it doesn't get $89 billion that it's asking Congress for to stay afloat. The U.S. Postal Service. African Americans are disproportionately employed by the U.S. Postal Service. If the U.S. Postal Service collapses, there's going to be thousands of African American jobs lost. And secondly, Donald Trump does not want people to be able to vote in the November 3rd, 2020 election by mail. He already said this past week, if people could vote by mail nationwide, Republicans would not win elections anymore. He already said that this past week. If we look at I'll just give you the title of this one. Maybe we'll have time to come back to this later. TheGrio.com, GRIO, had an article, and we posted it on my Facebook fan page, the African History Network. Postal Service running out of cash, and that may hurt African Americans. Postal Service running out of cash, and that may hurt African Americans. Donald Trump seems inclined to let the United States Postal Service die because he believes the agency needs to increase its prices, reported the New York Times. The COVID-19 crisis has hurt most major industries in the U.S., and the perpetually in debt Postal Service is no exception. The U.S. Postal Service has asked the U.S. Congress for $89 billion to stay afloat, insisting the agency will run out of money by the end of September 2020 if they don't get a cash infusion. Donald Trump may not be so eager to help, as he has long held the view that the Postal Service should charge on par with Amazon.com. Just last week, he rejected a cash bailout for the U.S. Postal Service. Donald Trump, the unstable genius, said, quote, they have to raise the prices on these companies who drop thousands of packages on the floor of the post office. Donald Trump told reporters at the White House this past Wednesday. They ought to do that. I'm pushing them. Now, Mark Diamondstein, is the president of the American Postal Workers Union, which represents more than 220,000 postal workers. He argued politics were at play with Trump's getting involved. He said at the end of the day, they have an agenda. Raise prices, reduce worker benefits, and reduce services, make it appear more profitable, and set it up for sale. The Postal Service is one of the country's biggest employers. As of 2018, according to Data USA, the agency employs over 330,000 employees with an average salary of $50,000 a year. While 67% of its employees are white, 21% of the agency's employees are African American. African Americans, 14% of the U.S. population. 21% of the employees of the U.S. Postal Service. Megan J. Brennan told the New York Times, quote, at a time when America needs the Postal Service more than ever, the reason we are so needed is having a devastating effect on our business. Postmaster General Megan J. Brennan told the New York Times. She said, quote, the sudden drop in mail volumes, our most profitable revenue stream, is steep and may never fully recover, end quote. Now, Megan J. Brennan told the New York Times that an expected 50% drop in mail volume since the same time last year could cripple the U.S. Postal Service, resulting in a reduction of regular mail delivery. A controversial mandate to pre-fund retirement benefits has also caused problems for the U.S. Postal Service, one of many moves viewed to cripple the agency and possibly privatize it. Because a lot of people are suspecting this is what Donald Trump actually wants. He wants the U.S. Postal Service to be privatized. So the post office is already on life support and has been reeling as bulk advertisers and others have cut back on their mailings given the realities of the COVID-19 pandemic. Postal workers, like those in warehouses, have been testing positive for the coronavirus. It has led to a reduction in staff across the country, multiple outlets have reported. Yet the Postal Service is still considered a place that African Americans can always find an opportunity to work. And I remember the movie Meteor Man. And let me know how much time we have left before the break, JT. The movie Meteor Man, starring Robert Townsend. Okay, came out. I think late '80s, early '90s. I remember Helen Martin played either his mother or grandmother. The veteran actress Helen Martin. Helen Martin played the role of Pearl Shea on 227, the nosy neighbor who's always in the window. On the TV show Good Times, she was Weeping Wanda. She was Wanda, their neighbor in the projects, Wanda. And she said in the movie there's always work at the post office. Because the post office, because it's federal government, that was one of the places where African Americans knew that we could work and get a fair shot, because it was the federal government entities were the first entities to institute and operate based upon affirmative action. Okay, that's Executive Order 11246, signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson. Okay, Executive Order 11246, dealing affirmative action. So you have this right here with the trouble that the U.S. Postal Service is in directly impacts the lives of African Americans. Yet the Postal Service is still considered a place that African Americans can always find an opportunity to work. Public sector jobs have allowed African Americans opportunities in many areas, more so than the public sector has, more so than corporations, things like this have. With African Americans making up more than 20% of the federal workforce, according to the Associated Press. Read the rest of this article. This is from thegrio.com. Postal Service running out of cash, and that may hurt African Americans. What the hell do you have to lose? The correct answer, Alex, would be everything. Give me everything for $100 million. The correct answer, Alex, would be everything. That's a Jeopardy question. What do African Americans have to lose in the Trump administration? Everything. And we see a steady reversal of policies that President Barack Obama put in place. But I've asked this question before. If you're under the misconception that no gains were made under the Obama administration for African Americans, then how do you know what to protect? If you're under the misconception that no gains were made, then how do you know what to protect? How do you identify threats that are trying to reverse what you have if you don't have a correct assessment of what you have? If you didn't know that the Affordable Health Care Act gave health care to 3 million non-elderly African Americans who did not already have health care, then when a con man comes along and talks about we're going to have something much better but can't tell you what it is, and right now his Department of Justice is in court right now trying to repeal the entire Affordable Health Care Act and take away health care from 20 million plus people, including African Americans. What the hell do you have to lose? The correct answer, Alex, would be everything. So if we go back to this article here from, now, first of all, people go to whitehouse.gov and get the document, Progress of the African American Community under the Obama administration. Progress of the African American community under the Obama administration. Because I deal with facts and evidence. I don't deal with feelings and emotions. That document is still there at whitehouse.gov. Trump hasn't taken it down. That shows you, category by category, how policies from President Obama positively impacted the African American community. That was up in like 2015, probably 2014 also. If we read that in 2016 before the election, it would have been a totally different outcome. This is what happens when you have bad information, you make stupid decisions. This is why you hear me say right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. When you have bad information, you make stupid decisions. All right. So we're coming up on a break. How much time before the break, JT? Okay. 4 minutes before the break. Calling numbers area code 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the calling number if you have a question or comment. Let's go back. Okay, so that was an article from the Griot. Then the article from one of the articles from New York Times. He could have seen what was coming behind Trump's failure on the virus. This is a huge article from New York Times, April 11th, 2020. Read this article, written by Eric Lipton, David E. Sanger, Maggie Haberman, Michael D. Shear, Mark Mazzetti, and Julian E. Barnes from New York Times. I read New York Times, Washington Post every day. Read that. Let's go back to the other article from New York Times. Black-owned businesses could face hurdles in federal aid program. Black-owned businesses could face hurdles in federal aid program. Minority business owners have always struggled to secure bank loans, especially African-American business owners specifically. And this is written by a white woman. I think she means well, but she should say African-American business owners, okay? Now, many banks want to deal only with existing customers when making loans through the government's $349 billion aid package. Now, I talked about this before they even rolled this out, okay? Because the banks, it's about 1,800 banks and credit unions that are working with the Small Business Administration. Well, they're taking care of their customers first. They're taking care of their customers first, okay? So what members of the Congressional Black Caucus are pushing for in this fourth coronavirus bill is funding for especially African American owned businesses that don't have existing business relationships, okay? Don't have existing business relationships with banks, okay? And to loosen some of these restrictions, because we're going to lose a lot of approximately 4 million African American owned businesses. I think maybe between 25% to 1/3 not going to survive this. Okay, so let's go back to this. Maybe have a minute before the break here. Let's go back to this article. So, after Yasmin Young, the owner of Diaspora Salon in Baltimore, Maryland, after she was forced to temporarily close Diaspora Salon because of the coronavirus pandemic, she tried to get an emergency loan under the federal government's $349 billion relief program for small businesses, but Bank of America, one of the biggest banks participating in the program, refused to consider her application because Ms. Young had a credit card from Capital One. Bank of America said Capital One was her primary bank. And Capital One was not yet accepting emergency relief loan applications. As of Friday, which would have been April 10th, as of Friday, April 10th, a week after the program was started, Capital One's website still advised borrowers to keep checking back for updates and said its online application would be available, quote unquote, shortly. We'll deal with this on the other side of the break. Listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, on the Superstation, the Future Radio. It is Sunday, April 12th, 2020, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well. We are in our second hour. So much to cover. You got to watch me during the week on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, and my Facebook fan page, The African History Network, where I broadcast there throughout the week so I can get deeper into this information. So right before the break, I was doing an update on some information dealing with coronavirus and the spread throughout the U.S. I was talking about this extensive article dealing with the impact it's having on African American owned businesses, and how African American owned businesses are having problems, many of them having problems tapping into the $349 billion that is part of that's set aside for small businesses. That's part of the stimulus bill, okay? And there's an extensive article from the New York Times that talks about this, okay? I'm going to go back to that. We'll go to the phone lines in just a minute here. I'm going to go back to that for a minute. And I was doing an update on what's been going on with the coronavirus as well. Okay. So I was talking about Yasmin Young. Yasmin Young is the owner of Diaspora Salon in Baltimore, Maryland, and she was discussed in this extensive article from the New York Times. Yasmin Young is among the thousands of small business owners at risk of being shut out of the government effort known as the Paycheck Protection Program, the Paycheck Protection Program, because of limits set by lenders grappling with overwhelming demand, which do not have to be repaid if the money is used for payroll, rent, or mortgage expenses, could be a lifeline for struggling businesses, especially struggling African American owned businesses. But that's if they can get the money, okay? And for small business owners like Yasmin Young, who is African American, the hurdles could be much higher. That's because minority-owned businesses, especially African-American-owned businesses, often have weaker banking relationships than their white counterparts. One legacy of the practice of redlining or refusing to lend to people in communities of color. And we know redlining was redlining was created by the federal government. That comes from the Homeowners Loan Corporation that was created in 1933. And around 1934. Blackpast.org has a big article dealing with redlining, blackpast.org. Right around 1934-37 or so, you have redlining being institutionalized. And redlining refers to a discriminatory pattern of disinvestment and obstructive lending practices that act as an impediment to home ownership among Africans and other people of color. Banks use the concept to deny loans to homeowners and would-be homeowners who lived in these neighborhoods. This in turn results in neighborhood economic decline and the withholding of services or their provision at an exceptionally higher cost. The origin of the term redlining stems from the policies developed by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, the HOLC, created in 1933 by the Franklin Roosevelt administration to reduce home foreclosures due to the Great Depression, and then institutionalized by the 1937 U.S. Housing Act, which established the Federal Housing Association, the FHA, the Federal Housing Association. Federal housing agencies, including the Owners Loan Corporation and the Federal Housing Association, determined whether areas were deemed unfit for investment by banks, insurance companies, savings and loan associations, and other financial services companies. The areas were physically demarcated or marked with red shading on a map. In contrast, zones which were to receive preferential lending status were marked in green shading, and intermediate areas in blue shading. Oftentimes, these decisions were arbitrarily based on the area's racial composition rather than income levels. While the practice was almost universal before the 1968 Civil Rights Act that passed, which is the Fair Housing Act of 1968. That year, that the Fair Housing Act theoretically outlawed redlining. Now, it took about 20 years for the federal government to actually have the teeth to really enforce the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Nonetheless, its impact was felt long after that date. In a Pulitzer Prize-winning articles which appeared in 1988 under the title "The Color of Money," Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter Bill Dedman, D-E-D-M-E-N, described how Atlanta, Georgia banks still discriminated by the racial designation of neighborhoods. His article illustrated how these banks were nearly twice as likely to lend to homeowners and prospective home buyers in low-income white neighborhoods as in affluent African American neighborhoods. As a consequence of redlining, neighborhoods that local banks deemed unfit for investment were left underdeveloped or in disrepair. Attempts to improve these neighborhoods with even relatively small-scale business ventures were commonly obstructed by financial institutions that continued to label the underwriting as too risky or simply rejected them outright. Check out the rest of this article here. It's a really good historical piece from blackpast.org, P-A-S-T, blackpast.org, entitled Redlining, 1937. Let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to John, line 1. Welcome to the African History Network show, John. Tell us where you're calling from.
Well, okay, I'm calling from Detroit, east side of Detroit.
East side of Detroit. Okay, go ahead.
I want to thank you, man, for breaking it down and educating the people about what happened with the redlining. I think he was going to pop his circle head up and so on, just another time. So, okay, that's the black, what people got tax dollars too. Remember that.
You said that's the what?
I said, they said African American tax dollars too, that Trump
right.
dispersed from homeowners and so forth.
Right, those are our tax
And,
dollars. Those are our tax dollars that are helping to pay for this $2.2 trillion bill. Okay, those are our tax dollars also. Yes, go ahead.
That's right. That's right. And so I just want to ask you, could you speak on California, being the governor of California, because you think he's doing something right, I hope so. And I just wanted to say, I think we'll we got to find another way to get some organized money in the black neighborhood. Okay, it's just that simple. I know we got to do something, and we just got to find a way to get some money in the black neighborhood, and we have to set up some type of what you call one of those investment zones and so forth.
Or investment zones, like opportunity zones, yeah. Opportunity zones comes from, or not, or we go back to the empowerment zones during the Clinton administration. We had empowerment zones right here in Detroit, and the empowerment zones helped to really increase the number of businesses, the number of African American owned businesses. Because I knew African Americans that had businesses in empowerment zones here in Detroit. But John, you mentioned the governor of California, Gavin Newsom of California. Now, what was it you want me to talk about regarding California?
Well, I just wanted to ask you, what is the circumstances that you see that he's doing something right, and this governor more better than this governor, we got Ms. Whitman. So I just want to know what you think about the way he's running California right now. And so forth.
The way he's running California?
Yeah, about this virus and so forth.
Well, I know, Governor, in California, I know they have, if I remember correctly, in California they have a stay-in order in California. The governor of San Francisco, who's an African-American female, she had a stay-in order before the governor instituted it statewide. He's been trying to get things like ventilators and resources from the Trump administration. From my understanding, he's been largely successful in getting so far what he needs from the Trump administration as far as ventilators. Now, I'm not sure as far as personal protection equipment for hospitals. We know that the state of New York, they are further ahead on the curve, and the situation in the state of New York is more acute and more tragic at this point than California. But you know, so far from California, I've been hearing some good things from what Governor Gavin Newsom is doing so far in California. But they can only do the governors had to take the lead on this because of the ineptitude of the Trump administration. Because the Trump administration dropped the ball, because Trump was downplaying the severity of this, because he was on Fox News calling this corona flu and basically equating it to the flu, the governors had to take the lead on this, and the governors have to rely on the federal government for personal protection equipment, for ventilators, for things like this. Okay, so once again, this is an example of how elections have consequences, and this is why you have to have competent leadership, especially when you're dealing with a crisis, when you're dealing with a public health crisis, when you're dealing with a pandemic. Okay, this is why you have to have competent leadership, because the federal government has resources that the individual states don't have. Okay.
That's right. Well, okay, I'd like to think about you were thinking about the governor of New York. I think the broken conditions be nice for them to put his head in the ring. Okay, I'd like to see governor of New York run for president. I'm not there.
Governor Andrew Cuomo stated this weekend in his daily press conference that he is not running for president. He's not running for vice president. Period. And full stop. He's governor of New York. He's going to stay governor of New York. He served in the Clinton administration. He was the former secretary, if I remember correctly, former secretary of HUD. He has no aspirations of going back to the White House or anything like that. He's the governor of New York. He's going to stay the governor of New York. So people can just dismiss those hopes and aspirations of him being added to the ticket as vice president. And nobody's going to run for president right now. It's too late to run for president. But we saw that with this past week. We saw Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race because the handwriting was on the wall. Bernie Sanders' campaign was effectively over after Super Tuesday when Joe Biden won 10 states out of 14. It's pretty much over after that. The death knell was when Joe Biden won the state of Michigan. Okay, and it was just it was over. So Bernie Sanders conceded this past week. He suspended his campaign. Joe Biden is going to get the nomination, as I've said before, and Donald Trump is scared to death because the one candidate out of 25 or 26 that Donald Trump feared the most and risked his presidency to try to stop, risked impeachment with his July 25th, 2019 call trying to shake down Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky to launch an investigation into the Bidens. The one candidate that Trump feared the most is who he's going to fight. And he knows he knows that Biden will beat him. This is why Trump risked his presidency and risked impeachment trying to stop Joe Biden.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, John. Okay, keep listening. All right. And then let me know if we have any more callers, JT. Calling numbers, area code 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600. It's the calling number if you have a question or comment. Back on, I think it was either April. Who's on the other line? Hold on. Say that again. Theo. Okay, we'll go to Theo just a minute. Hold the line. It's Theo Broten from Hood Research. Hold the line. I did a broadcast. I think it was March 10th. March 10th was, if I remember correctly, is when we voted here in the state of Michigan. I did a broadcast right after I voted, and I talked about how I went to vote and something very strange happened. There was an Asian American behind me voting. And I know for some reason people are under this misconception that Asians don't vote. I don't know who told you that. That's a lie. That's not true. They do vote. Their history is different than ours. They didn't go through 246 years of slavery, decades of Jim Crow segregation. They didn't need the 13th Amendment of 1865 or 14th Amendment of 1868. They didn't need a 15th Amendment of 1870. But Asians do vote. And as their U.S. population has gone from 4% to 5%, and their voter turnout has gone from 3.5% to 5%. If you go to NBCnews.com and look at their Asian American platform, because I read those articles at their Asian American platform, they talk about Asian Americans voting and their issues and how candidates are reaching out to the Asian American community and paying more attention to the Asian American community. But when you talk about Asian Americans, you're talking about people who largely come from at least 20 different countries. Not just China and Japan, but India, Sri Lanka, Thailand. They come from Vietnam, Cambodia, South Korea. You're talking about people who speak different languages, have different cultures, have different histories. And you're trying to compare them to a more homogenous group of African Americans who have more of a common history and speak one common language, have more of a common history. I mean, in 1910, well, actually, we go back to 1900. The Great Migration starts in right about 1915. 1900, 90% of African Americans live in the South because we had a common history. That comes from a legacy of slavery. So when you try to compare the Asian American community, and they're coming from largely 20 different countries, speak different languages, have different cultures, have different histories, many of them coming from countries where they could not vote because they're coming from dictatorships. That's a misunderstanding of history. It's totally inaccurate to try to compare that group to a more homogenous group of African Americans. I don't know where people get this nonsense from. But if you go back and watch that broadcast that I did, it's on my Facebook fan page, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep. I went through methodically and deconstructed that argument and provided you evidence as well. And then there was a big story that Tremaine Lee of NBC News did dealing with Asian Americans and voting. So I don't know where people get this nonsense from, but you should really stop repeating it and do more research. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM the Superstation, the Feature Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, April 12th, 2020. We are live. Hope everybody's doing well. We're broadcasting on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, on YouTube, and also our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, on Facebook. If you want to support the African History Network, you like this type of information, you can donate $ TheAHNShow through Cash App, $ TheAHNShow through Cash App, or paypal.me/TheAHNShow, paypal.me/TheAHNShow through PayPal. Then also at my website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All of my DVD lectures are available at our website, also AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And then we have our latest bundle pack is the Black Migration 1619 and 2019 bundle pack. And it includes my presentation, 6 Principles of Political Self-Defense, Understanding How Laws and Policies Impact the Economic Conditions of African Americans. 6 Principles of Political Self-Defense, Understanding How Laws and Policies Impact the Economic Conditions of African Americans. Let's go back to the phone line. Let's go to Theo Broughton on, I'm not sure which line she's on. Theo, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling. We have Theo on the line.
Okay. Yep, she's on.
Okay, Theo,
yeah.
Go ahead.
The smallest one from the head.
Okay, Theo, go ahead. You're on the air.
Hello?
Yeah, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Happy Easter to you. I am calling because, one, I appreciate your program very much, and two,
Thank you.
because of the kind of things that have been going on with this the virus and the conversation and the it's taking front row seat over everything. But here, our local elections are important as well. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that with some of the positions, you can pay a fee and be on the ballot. Other positions, you have to get petition signatures. And with the 6-foot distance and quarantine, etc., and the deadline being the 21st of April, I don't see that as being a possibility. People have been calling the Secretary of State and the governor and writing emails and letters asking to convert the other petition signature requirements into a fee, even if it's just for this political season right now. And I'm glad you brought up that point about the president wanting to shut down the post office.
Right.
It seems like everything he puts on now that he can't have his rallies is a reality show.
Yes. Yep.
And, so we have to be mindful of the kinds of tricks that are being played on the community and make sure that we stay focused on what's beneficial for us. Because in that case, what do we got to do? Would you say everything?
Everything, yes.
And the positions for a judge happen to be one that needs petition signatures.
For federal judge or state judge? Which position?
No, state.
State, okay.
There's congressional seat now. Our congressional seat is for ballot and election, voting, I should say. But state judge and third circuit judges, I believe there's quite a number of them. And there's not been any vetting of anybody. I don't even know who to vote for. And the primary will be in August.
Right.
So that's a decision that the governor and the Secretary of State are going to have to make and speak on.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Theo. Okay. Keep listening. All right. So let's go back to this. I want to go borrow a quote from New York Times because this ties right into African American owned businesses. And the caller John talked about we have to find other ways to get capital for businesses, and that's true. That ties into the SUSU system that's practiced among West African communities. That ties into the co-ops. We have a whole history of cooperative economics. This goes into tapping into our history. I encourage people to read the book Collective Courage by Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard. Collective Courage by Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard, a history of American cooperative economic thought and practice. And this deals with various co-ops that we've had throughout our history, even going back during slavery, whether we talk about the Free African Society of about 1787, whether we talk about the Colored Farmers Union starts in about 1886 and grows to about 1.2 million members. When we talk about the Colored Merchants Association around 1927, 1928, which comes out of the Negro Business League, the National Negro Business League, which was founded by Booker T. Washington. But even when we deal with Detroit's own Berry Gordy, Berry Gordy starts Motown Records in 1959, and we've heard the story that he borrowed money from his family, but it came from his co-op. His family had a cooperative. He borrows $800 from his family's cooperative to start Motown Records. And the whole concept of the co-ops and cooperative economics, these are African principles that we brought to the U.S. So when you hear me do my lectures, and I deal with the pyramid principle, and the foundation of a pyramid is African history and culture. It's our history and culture that gives us our values, our interests, and our principles. Our values, our interests, and our principles. This influences the two sides of the pyramid: economic empowerment and political empowerment. The history and culture, which gives us our values, our interests, and our principles, gives us a cultural paradigm that we see reality through, and it impacts the way that we engage in economics. Do we just engage based upon European capitalism, or do we use traditional cultural practices to engage in economics? Because various ethnic groups and cultures use cultural practices to engage in economics. So we have a deep, rich history in cooperatives, but many of us don't understand that history. And largely what happened was a lot of African Americans went to white business schools or went to business schools at HBCUs, and they may have been dealing with white business principles, and they learned white business principles and brought this back to the African American community to try to implement white business principles in the African American community. Now, you can learn things like about accounting and marketing and things like this, but largely the history of African American cooperatives, which tie into African principles coming from Africa, largely that was not taught in the white business schools or even many at the HBCUs. I'm not against business school because I went to business school. But what I'm saying is that you have to have another education to augment the business education, the business school education. Many people don't have that, so they operate based upon white business principles and bring that back to the African American community. It may benefit your family, and you may be able to employ some people from the community, things like that. That's good. But the cooperatives operate based upon a different principle, because the cooperatives are more beneficial to the community, and the people who are part of the cooperative are part owners of the cooperative as well. It's a different concept. It's coming from a different paradigm. So this is why our history and culture is so important. The people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the past and the present. The people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the present and future, and to meet the needs of the community. Okay, this is why our history and culture is so important. We've dealt with similar things before, not maybe exactly like you allow other people to do to you and get away with, is upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Okay, let's go back to this article here because we're running out of time. I want to get to these two. I want to get to these two stories. One dealing with Tyler Perry purchasing groceries for seniors, and also Master P providing services to clean seniors' homes in New Orleans. Okay, I want to get to those stories also. Let me try to silence this here. Okay, so let's go back to this article. Okay, so Yasmin Young, owner of a Diaspora Salon in Baltimore, Maryland, is among the thousands of small business owners at risk of set out of the government effort known as the Paycheck Protection Program because of limits set by lenders grappling with overwhelming demand. These loans, which do not have to be repaid if the money is used for payroll, rent, or mortgage expenses, could be a lifeline for struggling businesses if they can get them. And small business owners like Yasmin Young, who is African American, the hurdles could be much higher. That's because minority-owned businesses, especially African American-owned businesses, often have weaker banking relationships than their white-owned counterparts. One legacy of the practice of redlining or refusing to lend to people in communities of color. Research shows that African American and Latino business owners are denied loans at higher rates, anticipating that minority business owners could struggle to tap federal aid. Some lawmakers are proposing ways to earmark additional funds specifically for minority-owned businesses. And on this past Wednesday, which was the 8th, Wednesday, April 8th, 2020, for prominent investors, including John W. Rogers Jr., the billionaire co-chief executive of Ariel Capital Investments, which is a mutual fund, letter that the emergency loan program was already leaving African American borrowers behind. A 2016 study by economists at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research that only 1% of African American business owners get a bank loan during their first year of business, compared with 7% of white owners. Let me repeat this. A 2016 study by economists at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research found that only 1% of African American business owners get a bank loan during their first year of business, compared with 7% of white business owners. Twice as many white business owners, 30% of them, use business credit cards during their first year in business, compared with African American owners, among whom only 15% rely on a credit card. Now, African also start out with less capital, whether from investments or bank loans. White businesses, the study found. Home businesses continue to rely on family loans to a greater degree than white-owned firms in the 3 years following the firm's founding, end quote, the researchers found. They went on to say, this suggests that access to formal debt channels remains limited for minorities, end quote. Now, the institutions that frequently lend minority-owned businesses, especially those in low-income neighborhoods, are nonprofit organizations called community development financial institutions. Community development financial institutions. They rely on government funding and charitable donations to make loans, and grew out of earlier efforts to help African Americans build wealth in the wake of slavery and segregation. However, 78 of 950 such organizations are participating in this government program, according to a Treasury spokesman. Okay, the $349 billion program from this $2.2 trillion stimulus bill to make loans. Only 78 out of 950 community development financial institutions are participating in this government program, according to a Treasury spokesperson. The rest do not have authorization to participate because they have not previously been approved by the Small Business Administration, the SBA, to make loans backed by the agency. And you can go to SBA.gov, Small Business Administration's website, SBA.gov. They have information right on the homepage dealing with coronavirus and these loans that's part of this $349 billion set aside for small businesses. Now, this past Monday, the leaders of the Opportunity Finance Network, a group that represents community development of how government is impacting business. Government and government regulations and policies create the environment that your business operates within. So when I hear people talk about we're not going to vote, we're just going to do economic empowerment and invest in the stock market, I'm like, do you understand that policies from government impact the stock market? This is why the stock market had one of its worst quarters in history. Do you understand that the policies coming from the White House impact businesses and black-owned businesses right here in the state of Michigan? Once again, the statistics came out this past week that it's estimated that 1/3 of restaurants in the state of Michigan are not going to survive this coronavirus economic catastrophe. Well, they're largely talking about white businesses. If 1/3 of white restaurants are not going to survive, what do you think is going to happen to African American owned restaurants? Elections have consequences. So their representatives say they do not have clarity from the government on how to get that approval quickly enough to participate in the emergency program. This is the community development financial institutions. They're dealing with the Small Business Administration. So on Monday, this past Monday, the leaders of the Opportunity Finance Network, a group that represents the community development organizations, met with the Treasury officials to suggest ways that the government could quickly approve for the program. But later, in a statement posted on its website, the group said the Treasury officials were quote unquote non-committal about what, if any, response to the group's recommendations. A Treasury spokesman did a timeline for when more community organizations might be approved to participate. In their letter, the group of black investors, including Ariel Investments co-chief executive Melody Hobson, who you would hear on the Tom Joyner Morning Show every Monday, is an African-American female. She's brilliant, expert in finance, expert investor. She also happens to be married to George Lucas, who created Star Wars. She's married to him. She's married to George Lucas. You know, I guess if you're going to do wrong, at least do wrong right. At least you married a billionaire. What can I say? That's a whole nother show, but hell. I mean, okay. She serves on the board of J.P. Morgan Chase, and she proposed that a quarter of the $250 billion in additional money for small businesses that Congress is considering adding to the program be set aside for black businesses. Let me repeat this. Melody Hobson is married to George Lucas. George Lucas created Star Wars. He also financed the movie Red Tails, okay? Melody Hobson, who's co-chief executive at Ariel Capital Management, she serves on the board at JP Morgan Chase. She proposed that a quarter of the $250 billion in additional aid for small businesses that Congress is considering adding to the program be set aside for African businesses. Quote, this $68 billion about prioritizing clients that already have existing lines of credit. Black businesses and nonprofits find themselves yet again excluded from life-saving relief, end quote. Now, some federal lawmakers have proposed that part of the second stimulus could be directed to local business development organizations that focus specifically on helping minority businesses so that they can hire and offer advice to minority-owned businesses about how to get help during the pandemic. The $2 trillion CARES Act, the Coronavirus Rescue Act, the $2.2 trillion CARES Act allotted $10 million for minority chambers, like chambers of commerce, black business chambers of commerce. But some lawmakers say that is far from enough, which is true. Okay. During a call on Wednesday, a conference call on Wednesday with Vice President Mike Pence, members of the Congressional Black Caucus expressed concern that funds from the program were not reaching black business owners, according to Representative Emanuel Cleaver, the second Democrat of Missouri, and a caucus member who was briefed on the call after it took place. Vice President Mike Pence said that the program had gotten off to a shaky start in general. That is being generous. A shaky start in general? I mean, that's being kind. It was a horrific start. The Trump administration is basically making this stuff up as they go along. This is one of the most inept. I told you before, this is the Three Stooges and the Little Rascals running the government. This is one of the most inept governments that I've ever seen. Representative Emanuel Cleaver of Missouri, a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, said, quote, he did admit that he had some difficulty. He did admit that they had some difficulty. The fear now quickly, by the time we get the help for minority businesses by way of having advisors through minority chambers, chambers of commerce, black chambers of commerce, things like this, Hispanic chambers of commerce. The fear is the money will be exhausted. Quote. Yeah, because white businesses are getting this money. This is what I said before. While African Americans putting out videos talking about baby daddies don't get $1,200 a one-time check, you're gonna have white businesses getting this money, this $350 billion. I said we need to focus on that, because we can say some of these businesses, when they come back up, they can hire some of these brothers that are behind on child support. But these businesses go up, and white people run away with this money. I said this doesn't make any sense. There's going to be another bill after this. The bill after this is going to. There's going to be a huge bill after this, as I said before, because we just saw 6 million people file for unemployment, okay? If you go watch the broadcast I did April 9th, I think that was Thursday morning, April 9th, when the numbers came out, and I went through and broke this stuff down, okay? We look at the article from NBCnews.com. Unemployment surged by 6.10 workforce. This is from April 9th, 2020, NBCnews.com. It's a total of about 17 million people who have filed for unemployment this past week. In the past 4 weeks. About 17 million have filed for unemployment in the past 4 weeks. The previous week, it was 6.6 million. They have upgraded that to 6.9 million who filed for unemployment. Another wave of 6.6 million American workers filed first-time unemployment claims for the week that ended April 4th, 2020, bringing the cumulative total to an astonishing 16 million over the past 3 weeks. It's about 16.8 million. BlackAmericaWeb.com had a good article they picked up from the Associated Press dealt with this. For the week that ended March 21st, 3.3 million people filed new unemployment claims, easily shattering the record of 695,000 set in 1982. The record The record for the most number of unemployment claims filed in 1 week was set in 1982 at 695,000. Well, the weekend in March 21st, 3.3 million. Under the unstable genius who's supposed to be the big businessman, supposed to make America great again, talk about the greatest economy in the history of America. This wasn't the greatest economy in the history of America. And you base economies based upon GDP. This wasn't this economy in the history of America. But guess what? You're destroying the economy. And then the record of 3.3 million filing for unemployment, which was a record for 1 week, that was broken 2 weeks in a row. 6.6 million 2 weeks in a row, but the first 6.6 million was upgraded to 6.9 million. So when you look at there's a big article from the Washington Post. I talked about this in my Thursday broadcast. You have experts saying that we're basically in a depression. They're predicting unemployment rates of about 15%. Very quickly, 15%. You went from about 3.5, 3.6%, 17 people unemployed, and it's even more people than that unemployed, but the websites keep crashing, like Michigan.gov keeps crashing, so they can't file unemployment claims. These are just the people who actually filed. It's millions more who are unemployed. What the hell do you... The correct answer, Alex, would be everything. Last week, the astounding figure doubled. 6.6 million people filed claims for the week that ended March 28, 2020, a figure that was revised upward to 6.9 million in the new release. Thursday's figure, Thursday, April 9th, was at the high end of analyst estimates of 4.5 million to 7 million. Analysts said they estimated 4.5 million to 7 million will file unemployment. It was 6.6 million who filed. Those are the ones who can actually get through and get and actually file after the website kept crashing. Those are the ones who actually get through the telephone lines and file. Read the rest of this article. I don't have time to get through this. Okay, so we have that. Check out the one from New York Times. There's more to that because this is a 7-page article from New York Times. Black-owned businesses could face hurdles in federal aid programs. We saw Earl Graves passed away on Monday, April 6, 2020. Earl Graves was the founder of Black Enterprise. Phenomenal magazine, Black Enterprise. I've read it for years. I'm on blackenterprise.com basically every day. Black Enterprise founder and publisher Earl Graves Sr., the quintessential entrepreneur who created a vehicle of information and advocacy that has inspired 4 generations, F-O-U-R, 4 generations of African Americans to build wealth through entrepreneurship, career advancement, and money management, has passed away. According to his son, Black Enterprise CEO Earl Butch Graves Jr., he passed away quietly at 9:22 p.m. on April 6th after a long battle with Alzheimer's. Earl Graves was 85 years old. Now, Earl Graves was the author of the book How to Succeed in Business Without Being White. I read that book years ago. It came out in the 90s. Excellent book. And it's an award-winning classic business bestseller, How to Succeed in Business Without Being White. Earl Graves stated his life-defining purpose for founding Black Enterprise is simple, in simple, direct terms. Quote, the time was ripe for a magazine devoted to economic development in the African American community. The publication was committed to the task of educating, inspiring, and uplifting its readers. My goal was to show them how to thrive professionally, economically, and as empowered citizens, end quote. Driven by that mission, Earl Graves became a trailblazing entrepreneur in his own right, building Black Enterprise from a single magazine publishing company 50 years ago to a diversified multimedia business, spreading the message of financial empowerment to more than 6 million African Americans through print, digital, broadcast, and live event platforms. As such, Enterprise was one of 2 companies that would appear on the Black Enterprise 100s, the BE 100s, the publication's annual ranking of the nation's largest black-owned businesses each year of its 47 years. At one point, Earl Graves would operate 2 companies on the list, including Pepsi Cola of Washington, D.C., one of the nation's largest soft drink distributors owned by African Americans. Check out the rest of this article. They have a really good article written by Derek T. Dingle from April 7, 2020 at blackenterprise.com. Earl Graves Sr., founder of Black Enterprise, passes away at 85. So that's a big loss right there. But Black Enterprise lives. African American owned businesses have to have a succession plan. Huffington Post has a really good article about Tyler Perry. Atlanta Angel Tyler Perry paid for seniors' groceries at more than 70 stores. Let me know how much time we have left, JT. The actor, writer, and director purchased goods for elderly shoppers at 44 Kroger stores in Atlanta and 29 Winn-Dixie stores in Louisiana. 44 Kroger stores in Atlanta and 29 Winn-Dixie stores in Louisiana. Okay, let me know how much time we have, JT. Tyler Perry just made the lives of a lot of people in Georgia and Louisiana easier during the coronavirus pandemic. The 50-year-old movie mogul purchased the groceries for certain shoppers at 44 Kroger stores in Atlanta and 29 Winn-Dixie stores in Louisiana. Tyler Perry's generosity covered the halls of elderly people shopping during the hour reserved for them amid the global crisis, the global pandemic coronavirus. Tyler Perry currently lives in Atlanta and grew up in New Orleans. The receipts for the groceries were paid for were reportedly signed Atlanta Angel. Atlanta Angel. Check out the rest of this article from HuffingtonPost.com. Atlanta Angel. Tyler Perry paid for seniors' groceries at more than 70 stores. I mean, Tyler Perry has a really big heart. There's really a lot of good things that he does for everyday people. Then we see News1.com has an article about Master P. JT, are you there? News1.com has an article about Master P and the work Master P is doing in New Orleans. Master P offers free home cleaning to senior citizens in New Orleans during COVID-19 pandemic. They took care of us, now our turn to take care of them. Okay, from News1.com, and waiting for that article to load up. Okay, so amid the COVID-19 pandemic, New Orleans has emerged as one of the hardest hit U.S. cities. Hip-hop mogul and hip-hop artist Master P is on a mission to ensure that the most vulnerable groups in his hometown have the support and resources needed to make it through the crisis. According to WBRZ, he is offering to cover the cost of cleaning services for the city's senior citizens. And that's a great thing that he's doing also. He's helping the elderly population in New Orleans through his sanitizing and cleaning company, Master Clean Life. Master Clean Life. The company sells an array of disinfecting cleaning products designed to sanitize homes and businesses. In addition to offering free deep cleaning services, he's providing senior citizens with free hand sanitizers. He said, quote, "The more we make, the more we give." Okay, Percy Miller, Master P, said in a statement, "Through these uncertain times, we really wanted to help our elderly get through this. Many of the seniors not able to get to the stores. They are running out of groceries and resources are low. We just want to do what we can do to help them. They took care of us. Now it's our turn to take care of them." Check out the rest of this article at News1.com. News1.com. Master P offers free home cleanings for senior citizens in New Orleans during COVID-19 pandemic. And that's from April 12th, 2020. All right. So we run out of time here. I have to get to this article. I'll do another broadcast dealing with this. This is from Yahoo.com, news.yahoo.com. Marijuana could make the lungs more susceptible to COVID-19, experts say, as cannabis sales spike. Let me know how much time we have, JT. A smoking habit could also make a person's symptoms of COVID-19 more severe. Some studies and anecdotal reports suggest marijuana can help people cope with anxiety, which is being felt deeply across the world as the coronavirus pandemic continues. But lung health experts warn smoking marijuana regularly could increase a person's risk of contracting COVID-19 and also having more severe symptoms and complications from the disease, given evidence on tobacco and COVID-19 and what we already know about how heavy marijuana smoking can impact the lungs. Okay, preliminary CDC data found that chronic lung diseases, including asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, and emphysema were common underlying conditions in hospital patients in the U.S. The CDC, let's see here. Smoking marijuana could also make a person's COVID-19 symptoms worse compared to a non-smoker, said Dr. Panagis Galasatos, a pulmonologist and national spokesperson for the American Lung Association. So check out this article also. We have to get out of here. Smoking marijuana could make the lungs more susceptible to COVID-19, experts say, as cannabis sales spikes. So remember, the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over until we win. Wakanda forever. Stay tuned for Pastor Mo. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.